The human mating dance, right, is a very complicated thing, right?
Yeah.
In some sense, your future wife is out there.
It's about two things, really. It's about possibility and it's about negotiating power. There's this kind of subtle playing of hints and hinting and suggestion.
The psychology of all this in terms of jealousy and the terms of notions of roles in relationships is very dynamic right now.
And there's been a lot of beautiful writings about this. I'm not on the apps because that's not my thing, but I research this a lot through other people.
So the dynamics of a relationship are where the learning is, because we learn how we react to other people reacting. It's not just a 2-arrow system. There's 4 arrows. There's how you feel towards the other person.
Yes.
There's how they feel towards you. But then there's an arrow that comes back to you, which is how you feel about how they feel. And then they have an arrow of how they feel about how you feel, right? There's one version of ourselves where we respond to that, or they respond to us. But there's another version where we respond to that, but it's also, there's a processing of what it means for us that they're behaving that way or feeling that way. Let's be really honest. This is a little bit of a tricky topic, but there is a power dynamic in relationships. Sometimes, not all, but in some relationships, it works much better if one person leads and the other person follows. So human beings need to learn how to at least understand and control these dynamics.
What people the psychologists and the Freudian types really appreciated, and we understand a little bit from biology, is that there's also a power negotiation in any kind of interaction, like a sexual interaction, right? Because both people are making themselves very vulnerable. All the discussions around consent, all right, they're very valid nowadays, because what we're really talking about is that there is inevitably a power negotiation. It's all changing. Like now, because of action movies, there's this tendency for especially young guys to think that they have to look like action heroes. People obviously have attraction to different phenotypes. So there is this thing about what signals fertility, right?
Oh yeah.
Now, and then with women, they'll report that some women like guys that are really heavily muscled, and some like men that are more svelte, more slim, right? So that's what I heard. Well, there's this idea of an arousal template, right? Like people have an array of things that to them are arousing. And for some people, that arousal template is very narrow and very specific. And this is discussed in certain communities more than others. But some people are like pure dominant, pure submissive. Some people are what they call switch, right? There's this whole landscape. There's a really interesting literature about this. If you look at sort of who people select to have sex with versus who people select to try and form long-term relationships with them, there are also issues of sort of body type preference and safety. I mean, there are many men who would not choose to be with the woman that is most attractive to everybody because they don't have the confidence they could keep her.
That's
right?
a good point.
Even if she's not a flirt. Some men deliberately wouldn't want to be with the most beautiful. People tend to match up pretty closely in terms of attractiveness. Pretty closely. Not always. Yes, it's true that resource potential is an important variable because people have to think about safety and childcare and a number of things.
But of course,
women work too, right? Women can work too. But more important than any other feature across all cultures is that the woman reports that she sought someone who is kind to them. Not necessarily kind to everybody, but kind to them. In other words, they're not interested in being with someone who's really wealthy who treats them like garbage. It's about safety and kindness, because you're talking about a long-term bond. Kindness towards them is critical, but not necessarily kindness to everybody. When you look at the roots of jealousy and concerns about infidelity, it all kind of makes sense in this very old-fashioned model. It also makes sense in the model that we live in now, because the last thing you want is someone with a ton of reproductive potential, resource potential, who's going to treat you like garbage. Chances are they're not going to stay with you. Or you're going to be there, but then they're going to bring in other mates. Kindness toward each other is fundamentally the most important variable, which is kind of reassuring. I don't say that to be politically correct. That's how the data fall out. And that never gets discussed because it's not as edgy as thinking like, oh yeah, it's all about money, it's all about beauty, it's all about this. And so there's also something very special to people about the other person who is very desired by a lot of people, treating them particularly nicely.
And it has to do with, when you first meet someone and you're attracted to them, you're essentially objectifying them. Meaning, not in the way people might think, you are not dependent on them for emotional stability or survival.
The closer you get to somebody, you form a real emotional bond, the harder it is to objectify them.
And I use those words in the true, the psychological sense, not in the way they're typically thrown around nowadays.
Objectifying someone is you want them, right? You desire them, but you don't need them for anything. You don't need them to pay your rent. You don't need them for emotional support. You don't need to be held. You don't need any of that. So the human mating dance is one of, at first, objectification.
Yeah.
Anyone who argues different is probably not of our species. And then slowly over time, less and less objectification and more emotional dependence. They're no longer just an object. You're no longer just an object to them. You know, it's tricky, right? Because everyone loves when you get to the point of relationship where you can just hang out, you just watch movies and stuff. But then, you know, if you're not actually objectifying each other every once in a while,
you need to.
It can go really flat. Sexual attraction is the thing of objectification. But then as you enter into relationship, you lose that. And so a lot of times people will have affairs. People will start looking at pornography excessively instead of their person. Relationships can continue a long periods of time with a lot of excitement, like sexual excitement, but also healthy attachment by cycling in and out of objectification, attachment, objectification, attachment.
You know, in some cultures, men and women will only touch for 2 weeks out of the month. And then for the other 2 weeks, the excitement and the sensuality and the sexuality is very heightened. And then they go back to this kind of distancing. Statistically, those relationships tend to last a very long time with at least reported mutual feelings of intense attraction for many, many, many decades. But there's also the element of nurturing, right? I mean, I think that going through life with somebody is so much better than going through it alone. And I'm sometimes so positively struck by how supported I feel because for many years I was just kind of doing everything on my own. So any little thing, I'm like, oh my goodness, this feels huge. But if one is mainly focused on taking good care of the other person, provided they're also focused on taking good care of you to some extent, and we're good at taking care of ourselves, everybody flourishes, everything gets better. Looking to anything external to soothe yourself is it puts you in a terrible position to be a caretaker of yourself and other people, right? So learn how to self-soothe, right? Learn how to calm your mind, steady your actions, steady your voice. And I think that when people say relationship is hard, the only really hard part of a good relationship is just dealing with oneself and making sure that you're staying in that mode of caretaking. And also I think the dynamics have to be right. People need to know what they need. And so knowing what you need and what you crave is really important. And then once you do that, you can create the relationship you want. I've seen that over and over again. And people are different.